them up. So I'm going to bring up the Zoom first, just so you can see this a little better. Generally, since we've already loaded this, you just want to bring up VM, right, for VM Workstation Pro. And we'll just open that. And I don't want to do more than like a half hour, 40 minutes of this, but just enough to get you an idea of how you would start creating the database. I'm going to power on the virtual machine. Let's see, which one are you guys? You're this one, I think. This is just telling you what devices are connected. As I said, you can connect your thumb drives and things to the virtual machine. You can also copy and paste things from within the virtual machine to the outer machine and vice versa. I don't think it'll let you drag. There are some tools you could have that would let you drag, but I think you have to actually copy and paste to move them. And you're doing updates?
Yeah.
How many are doing updates? It's weird that the updates come at sporadic moments. I'm going to kill this too. I'll zoom again when I get inside. Assuming I'm not updating also. If nothing happens for a while, that's a sign that it may be updating. See, this is an exciting part that might not be that great on the video. Everybody's updating pretty much. Let us hope that it's not a horrible long update.
Yeah. It seems to be stuck at 100%.
Well, let's hope it goes up through here. Don't you have one? Oh, no, it's just an 18.
Yeah.
I have 2 copies of both. There's 2 virtual machines. One has SQL Server and Visual Studio on it, and one is blank. And I have a copy for each class, basically, because they're different things. You're still stuck at 100? Give it a few minutes. If worst case comes, you can always kill it.
Does it explicitly not?
Yes, I know it does. There is always a chance if you kill it that it'll never come back, but that's. Looks like your folder's still there.
Yes. No.
Oh, so it doesn't. If you want to go on that. Yeah, that's one thing about these virtual machines, they don't move. They're too big to go with your profile. So you're stuck on a machine.
This folder, you may want to close out this and go into as you download to on the machine. Because it'll be hard to open that back and forth. The machine takes up a lot. They're on there.
Give it a moment. What I'm doing today is more for future reference, so that I'd hate to have you have to reinstall the whole, do it all over again. Give it, I don't know how long. Or you can do one of these things.
Yes. So I think
which it may not override.
So, yeah, so we're
It's not actually running the thing.
it's almost like getting a tile slice too. It's the concepts of one part, like being able to use the tool to go a long way. There's so many hooks and handles. The SQL Server, and without trying to I just can't get enough of Steve. Steve, and then I'm sitting there for a while, so. It just depends. Sarah's this job. She wears electric hats out in Seattle. Yeah, those two, that's the working family.
I really like it. I'd like
Yeah, they make computing fun. It's like, and they even encourage us to go to meetups, get free food, we do it. It's like, try to get a job, have fun.
Yeah, I like that.
And then we have if you made it fun like those two, Steve, what's the
So, this is your.
yes, I do. I moved here from
Oh, okay. Very good. Oh, wow.
It's a lot better than this. A lot more innovation. Okay, okay, your accent is yeah, to me, I can't get rid of it. So people that are not here so what? How them make you feel ill? I help you out today. I need help today. I'm definitely doing database. Let's use that a lot. It's either web development or mobile. Yeah, Scott is looking at full stack. A lot of more of the sales. My job is that it's a good work with stuff. We need more active. So it's coming around trying to figure out foundational skills. That's fast.
So just, yeah, move that folder over. I was trying to kill my box. Sometimes I don't like that.
Okay, shit. Some way
You don't want to do it for interest.
Here's supposed to be. It's open now.
It'd be better to copy it to anybody else necessarily. All right, so I'm gonna get going here. How many are still updating? So we learned from the corner machine there, don't. So give it a little bit and hopefully it'll come back. That one can, what if you didn't make it?
Oh, I moved to the restart. So I don't know if it's actually
Also, the VM machine, you can also download it. In the store, yeah. It's, yeah. And you see here, I set up a little shortcuts and that's not. So yeah. You don't have to go to the I'd say that's because
What we're doing today,
it's hard because you don't have information.
it's not going to, you won't be behind if it doesn't work right now. All right, so this is like why I want to edit the videos, because there's a long dead spot at the beginning of this one now. Anyone else having problems? You're still updating. Best to let the updates go. When we killed it, we killed Windows. My computer in my office today did the big update, the big fall update. So, all right, so I'm going to go in here, and as I said, I'm just going to show you this. It's not something, it'll be next week probably before we're doing this, or possibly as early as, because this is only Tuesday, right? Possibly as early as Thursday. So password 1 is the password. And you're still updating again.
yeah, I think I'm gonna give it one more go.
I hate the updates. One of the things about Windows 10, if it's not networked, and these aren't, these are standalone on your machine, is there's no way to shut off updates. If they're networked, you can make a network policy that all the updates are stored on a server, and then you can decide when to do them. But when they're standalone, you don't have that choice. So I'm going to maximize this, and then I will do, I don't know if that's here. I'm going to do the magnifier from within here. All right. So I pinned SQL Server down here. Did I show you how to do that? If you don't have it, you can do, I'm just going to type Microsoft SQL, is it going to find it? Server Management Studio, but it only comes up, I don't know why it comes up as just a information. So I'm just going to go down to Microsoft SQL Server and then Tools and then the Management Studio. You made it.
I was scared that I hit 100.
All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a little bit about making a database. Looks like you're finally here, maybe? You already installed it, didn't you? Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's just left over. Right go. So you should have this when you bring it up where it says desktop, whatever that number is, SQL Express. I just want to show if it's gone, you don't have to do this. You can do /SQL Express. The // is basically the same thing as saying machine name / SQL Express. When you connect, it should, you know it connects because that disappears in the Object Explorer, all your, your folders appear. Anybody have trouble connecting? Except for the people that are having troubles with their VM entirely. No space. In SQL Express. We have space between SQL and Express. Well, yeah, we have to do SQL Express. If you install SQL Express, you install the whole server.
Typically, because we do community service,
So if that doesn't work,
that's what we do.
yeah, I was just showing that those are really.
Oh, yeah, so we had a good, what we did was like we downloaded some GitHub, secret script, execute, and it would add.
So
We get it from the form that's in that venture and we must do what's called right click attach. Yeah, so you go, so you right click on the database and you get the kill stuff. Yeah, so you have to, look involved in it. For instance, we have if you can't always do your work, it's always just better.
yeah, you don't
Well, this is this is the automatic. And these are live. So if you edit these, you will actually have the actual. But it's good to, go through the science, like, bus call, and these here is like, hey, let's get link to that. Shoot these in there, so join. It's matrix manipulation. Instead of manipulating numbers, we're doing data. That's around. It's like a big, again, three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle of data.
Yeah.
And you'll find out most of those guys.
Oh, since we're in the
Because you got to manage all this information. So first, I like doing things for body, I think it's, I can go, I'll do them, and then,
the profiler is at the top. Profiler is just for
I see the born.
observing what's going on in the SQL server while it's running.
Putting this together, this is one.
So one of the things you can do with this, if you want, is while it's up, you can right click down here and you can pin it. Mine says unpin because I've already pinned it. But you can pin it to the taskbar and you never have to look for it again because it's always down there. All right, so are we ready to build a database? So you got through. That's good. You finally made it.
You just added metro alt and community resource, right?
Yeah, but I'm not. That's not what I'm going to do now. All right, are we ready? This is always goes more chaotically than I had meant. So I want to make a new database. This is different than what we did where we added existing databases. That's for the other one. I'm going to right click. I'm going to show you how to do it graphically, and then I'll show you a little bit how to do it with SQL. And again, I don't want to, even though this is taking a while, I don't want to go beyond, say, 4:30 at the latest, because I do want to get to each group, right? And maybe may cut it a little bit earlier than that too. So I'm going to do new database. This is the graphical way. And actually, when I make a database, well, I'll show you the other way too. So right here, you can give it a database name. And, oh, what's a good database name? I don't want to do Vincent's yet. I'll let you guys do that in a bit. Let's do test database. Okay, a couple of things I want you to just be cognizant of. You have, by default, 2 files. You always have 2 files. And if you ever want to move this database, you have to move 2 files. So the first file, the one that's called primary, and if you go down here, it gives you like where that file is, and you can give the file a separate name. The first file has all of your data in it, all of the data structures like tables, right? All of the, everything that's in the database is basically in that first file. Now it's possible to split it into multiple files. We're not going to do that. It's enough to deal with 2 files. The second file is the log. And what the log does is it keeps track of every transaction that occurs in the database since your last backup. All right? If you totally had a disaster, assuming you've backed things up, which we won't probably bother doing, but assuming that that happened, you got in. You could restore your backup, and then you could restore the log file to get all of the transactions that had happened since the backup. So you could restore it up to a moment in time. You could actually stop restoring the log right before you did something really stupid, right? Because it is possible to hose a database with a bad command. So you could restore it up to right before you did that command. So you have 2 of these here. By default, they have the same name as the database. And by default, they're going to go into where the this long path, Microsoft SQL Server. So it's C, program files, Microsoft SQL Server, MSQL 14, SQL Express, MS SQL data. That's where they go by default. We're not going to worry too much about that. In real life, you should not put your files there. You should put your log should never be on the same disk as the data files. Yeah, because if the disk dies, then you're just screwed, right? Unless it's on a different disk. So in general, I'm just going to do OK. There are all sorts of options you could set, but we're not going to worry about it. Notice I have a test database. And a database has all sorts of possible files here, folders. We're going to focus mostly on tables because we want to create tables. I'm going to show you 2 ways to a couple of ways to create tables. One of them is simply to right-click on tables. There's a lot of right-clicking. For Mac people, this is sort of an anathema. Yeah, question?
What if we don't have the test database?
Did you make it and say OK? Right-click on databases. Database. And just also test database test. And then you can just do OK. The rest is just one of the things I love to put a space in there. They won't kill you, but you shouldn't put spaces in names. Technically, spaces are illegal characters, and it wouldn't. SQL Server Management Studio will deal with them, but sometimes when you're programming, it's a real pain to have a space in something. Just by the way, it's fine. So I'm going to make a new table, and this is one way to do it, and I'm going to show, as I said, a couple of others. So it pops up a thing here, and it gives you column name, data type, and whether or not to allow nulls. You'll see a form very similar to this in MySQL. right? So I'm going to say test ID. And for a data type, I'm just going to make it an int. Maybe I'm going to do a real quick walk through data types. Not that I expect you to remember them. 90% of these you can ignore. All right. Big int is if you need really big ints, like in the hundreds of billions, right? What is a 32-bit int? Does anybody know the highest value a 32-bit thing can be? I used to know. It's 3 billion something, right?
Like to the 32nd or 33rd
Yeah.
power.
But it's surprising sometimes it's not big enough. So big int is a 64-bit int. Okay. But generally you don't need it. Binary you can pretty much ignore. Binary means that it's it's for like images and things like that, except that there's other data types that work better for it. Bit, you might want, bit is what they have for a Boolean. A bit is 0 or 1, right? So 1 is true, 0 is false. Date, you might want, date is just date. Date time has the date and the time. Date time 2 lets you set some precision on your date, how many seconds you want to go out on that one, that date time. So the 7 there is just a suggested number, though there is a max, and I'm not sure what it is. Date time offset we're never going to use, so we'll probably use date and date time, but probably not date time offset. Offset is how far offset are you from Greenwich Mean Time? How many time zones away from it are you? Decimal we might use. Decimal is just a floating number with decimal points. What this says is that it's 18 digits long and that there are 0 digits to the right of the decimal point. If you put it like a 2 there, that would mean there would be 16 digits to the left of the decimal point and 2 digits to the right. This tells you how much precision you're going to have on the decimal side. This is the total length, how much precision you're going to have in total. And those numbers are variable. You can make them not as big as you want, but you can make them fairly big. So I would use decimal. I would ignore float, which is similar, except you have no control over it. We're not going to do geography. Those are fairly new. Those are if you want to do a lot of database stuff for geolocation. You know, if you want to map things in terms of your geolocation, you have to provide the latitude and longitude. That's what the geography one is for. Geometry, I have no idea why you would do that, but I guess if you need angles and sines and things like that. Hierarchy ID, again, we're going to ignore it. So as I said, there's only a couple of these that really matter for us. The hierarchy is so relational databases are not hierarchical, right? There is no steps, stepped hierarchies of values, but sometimes you want to be able to map the relational data to a hierarchical structure. So you can basically create levels of hierarchy with a hierarchy ID. Again, it's not something we're going to do, but that's what it's for. Image is deprecated. You should ignore it. Int is what we're using. You can use money if you want when you're dealing with money. A lot of people are annoyed because it has 4 decimal places. We think of money as having 2 decimal places. It has 4. I have no idea why it has 4. Banks go out farther than that. Banks go out as far as the decimals go. They love fractions of pennies. In fact, not that it matters. Years ago, I used to teach writing and computers and stuff to bankers, and banks make most of their money by loaning things out for a few seconds because you have to have a certain amount of money in your reserve in order to make out certain loans. So if they make a loan and they don't have enough money, they borrow it from another and they pay the interest on it, and they may only need that money for a few moments. Doesn't matter. Anyway, money is the only thing about it that annoys people is that it has 4 decimal places. In car you might use. In car, anybody have any idea what that would be? Just it's a characters, yeah, and it can go. It has 10 as a default, but it can go up to 255. So basically, anything it stores it in 1 byte. The in is not what you would expect. The in is for Unicode as opposed to ASCII. When we do MySQL, they're all just Unicode by default. Microsoft tries to be backwards compatible. It has Unicode and ASCII. Do you guys know what Unicode is? Okay, anyone not know? It's okay if you don't know. Okay, so ASCII is what they did for the original keyboards. Every character on the keyboard has to be stored in the computer as a number. And originally, their ASCII has 0 to 255 values. It's basically they tried every value you can store in a byte. So the essential ASCII code is essentially what's on the keyboard. But it doesn't do other characters for other languages. Unicode contains all the character sets for pretty much every language on Earth, and it even includes Klingon and Elvish and a couple of other made-up languages because it's really big. The thing is that it's stepped, so the first 255 characters of Unicode are exactly the same as ASCII. So if you're doing mostly English characters, fine. You know, it doesn't have, whether you use ASCII or Unicode makes no difference. Then it steps out to 16 bits for the next set of languages, and then out once you've used up all of those character sets, and it goes into 24 bits, and then 30. It just keeps stepping out for the size up until 64 bits, I think. Might even go beyond that. Might go to 128. But anyway, they have room for every character set pretty much in the world, and room enough to add fake ones like Elvish. You can write Greek or Cyrillic or Chinese, right, with Unicode. So, and every modern computer has Unicode built into it. So I would just use the in-car. In-car is the other thing about in-car. It's fixed width. Does that make any sense? When you say that an in-car character is 10, that means it's always going to print 10 characters to the disk, even if what you type in is only 4 characters. It's always going to print 10 to the disk. It's fixed width. Whereas in varchar is variable width. And it's also can go up to 255. So in varchar, if you say 50, and you can go up to 255, and it's only 5 characters, it will only print 5 characters to the disk. So this is more wasteful of disk space, but it involves less processing time, because with varchar you have to calculate the width before you print. That makes sense? So it's a choice, and the choice differs depending on your environment as to whether it's better to use the processor time to calculate the width and save disk space, or less processor time and just print, waste disk space. It's really a choice that depends a lot on where you are. But I do use in-car and in varchar quite a bit. And those are character types. That means basically words, right? So the ones that we'll probably use are basically int, possibly money, the date or the date time, in varchar and in-car. There is a thing called in varchar max. Don't use it unless it's what you really want. In varchar max allows you to enter text up to 4 gigabytes. of text. That's a lot of text. That's like all of Dostoevsky as one big text file. So the drawback of this is that you can't query it directly. You can pull it up, but you can't query it. This doesn't matter a whole lot, but no row in SQL Server can be larger than 14 kilobytes because of the way it stores stuff underneath. So what it does when you have a 4 gigabyte field is it doesn't store it in the table. It creates a pointer to it elsewhere in the file. Does that make sense? And because it's just a pointer, you can't query it directly. You can just call it up. Right? You can't query the contents of it. Does that make sense? It doesn't. It's not super important, but the big thing is don't use max unless you're going to write a lot. You do need it. I mean, other fields are limited to 255 characters. So if you need a lot of writing, you would probably do want a max. But I'm not going to worry about small int. Small int is up to 255, 0 to 255. Small money just means it's less precision on the money. I would mostly ignore these. Ignore text. You don't want it. There are some time. Time is written in military time, and 7 is the precision, how far you want to go out. It won't accept time, and it'll accept dates in a lot of formats, but it won't accept time in a lot of formats. It just wants it in military time. Timestamp will give you kind of what it says, a stamp of the current time. Tiny int is, I'm not even sure what tiny int. Tiny int, does it go to 255? I'm not sure how far it goes. Unique identifier, you know those keys you enter? Or when you install software, that's what they look like. Why would you use them? Sometimes they're good for, in one of my databases, I use them as a code to confirm that a donation, right? So here's the confirmation code for your donation. I mean, you can do things with them. var binary, we're not going to worry too much about, although the var binary max is actually what you should use to store images. We're not going to store images, but you could store images and other things. You could store a binary Excel file or something like that. XML is neat. I probably won't deal with it. Something that's new, but they're not showing. Did they show up here? There are JSON. They will store JSON now. But anyway, I'm going to do test ID and int. As I said, I'm not going to review those again. There's only about 4 of them that you'll find that you want over and over again. All those others are kind of for special cases or for backwards compatibility. So I'm going to do test ID. Down here, there are some properties. One of them, it's really hard to navigate. So it's still not there. Identity specification. And if I say is identity and change that to yes, which is just crazy here with this zoom, what that'll do, notice it has an increment 1 and an identity seed 1. And again, you never have to do this for our database. But what that does is it turns that ID into an auto number. It means it'll just count automatically, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? It just turns it into an auto number. I don't expect you to remember all this, by the way. I will help you with things as you go through. But that turns it into, they call it an identity when you have the auto number. One thing MySQL does that makes more sense is they just call it an auto number. Okay, so that turned that in. And then I'm just going to say test description. and I will do that as in varchar, and I'll just change it to 255. So a couple other things I'm going to do. This test ID, I'm just going to right click on it, and I'm going to set it as the primary key. So I just right clicked on it. And now it says I could remove the primary key. This is whether you allow nulls. Do you guys know what nulls? It tells me I can't set allow nulls on a primary key. Primary keys cannot be null. So a null is an empty field, right? It's just empty. It is not it's one of the things that they say, it's not equivalent to 0, and it's not equivalent to an empty string. It means it's an unknown value. It's just empty. So the question is whether you allow nulls. If you don't allow nulls, if it's unchecked, it means it's required. Does that make sense? So if you require something, that means that when you're entering data, you have to put something in that field. So one of the decisions to make along the way is to whether something is required or not. So this is one table. Notice I haven't named it yet, but if I go up here to save it, I'm just going to call it test table. Okay. And I'm going to do OK. And if I look under tables here, if I right click on tables and do refresh, there's the test table, and I can look at the columns, and it has test ID and test description. Does that make sense? Yeah.
How did you get the test ID to be the key?
I right clicked on it. So there's two ways to do it. If I select it, I just right clicked on it. I think that there is actually I don't see the key up here. Sometimes there's a key up here. So I just right clicked and said, now it says remove, but so if I remove it, it's gone. Set. All right, so I'm going to close that. I'm going to show another way. Yeah.
I have in the identity specification. I have no, and I cannot change
You gotta click it.
You got to click the little arrow beside it.
Oh. Yeah.
And then the next, oh, actually you have it. And then is identity. Change that. Click on that. Yeah, and then change that to yes. There might be over.
I tried.
You gotta set the identity specification.
Oh, you know what?
Yes.
You also have to be on the field.
Oh.
Now you should be able to do it. Is identity. Now I think you can change it to yes. Okay?
No, I tried.
Why is it not doing it? Hint. Should allow that. Is identity. Now. There it is. Maybe I had to select the whole
row.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So when you do your, I'm going to show you a better way to do this probably, as I said, and then we'll probably call it good for today. When you do your tables, they would be the same tables that you have in your database. I'm going to show you one other way to make a table. I'm not expecting you to do this, and then I'll show you the way that I think you probably should do it. So this is a SQL query, and I'm going to say use test database. Is that big enough? I can change font. Tools, options, fonts. I'm just going to make it a lot bigger for now. Is that better? So if I execute that, I'll be in test database. And then I'm going to say create a table. Let's say test. I'm just trying to invent something off the top. Something like test instance test. What would you call it where you give the test? It's not a good name, but it's what I'm going to go with. So I'm going to just do test instances. It'll be an int identity 1 1. That means it's the same thing what we did it there. And I'm going to make it the primary key. And then test, I'm just going to say test location in var car 50. I'm going to say that can't be null. I'm not actually going to put data in here probably though. Test time. Let's just do test date. Date time. What is it not? And then I'll just say that that's not null. Okay, so this is another. And then let's do test ID as a foreign key. So, what is it not like? The test table ID. Oh, yes, thank you. Good idea. Good eye. Still doesn't like test ID. Oh, int. So that's a foreign key. This is a primary key. I don't expect you to do this, although if I were to create the database, this is how I would do it. But you'd need to be somewhat fluent with SQL. This will just give you, this is one way you can do it. So I'm going to run that. I'm going to go from the opening parentheses to the end. I mean, basically the whole thing. I'm just going to execute it. Down below, it just says command completed successfully. If I right-click on tables and refresh, we have now test instance. And if I look at the columns, it has test instances, location, test date. And if I widen that out a little, you can see that it has the primary key and the foreign key and all of the other stuff. This is by far the most efficient way to do it, but again, you have to know what you're doing, which is, I don't expect. Yeah.
I was getting an error with the, I got right from test table.
Did you name your table test table? Did you create test table? Did you save that?
Yeah, saved that. Okay, I must have used name.
But I think it saved it as
Table one.
table one.
Okay, yeah. Okay, how do I save it to?
So refresh over here on tables. Okay. Okay, so you have table one.
Okay.
So right click in the
Name, okay, got it. Just start test table.
Yeah. Technically, if we were
No
doing it,
space, got it.
yeah. Well, technically, if we were doing it in SQL, you'd have to drop it. It's not seen like that. They probably will let you. Not that it matters because we're not going to do a ton of SQL in here, but if you make a change over here, it's not necessarily seen over here. What you do over here isn't seen over here until you refresh. The two are connected but not live. You have to refresh things to see the changes. So this is another way to make a table. All right, and now I'm going to show you the way that I would suggest that you do it when you actually get into building things. As I said, this, if you're comfortable with SQL or really want to try it, you can try doing this. You do have to build them in a certain order because you have to have the primary keys before the foreign keys. All right, so the other option is I'm going to create a database diagram. So I'm going to do a new database diagram. And you get this every time when you first do it, and it's not something to panic over. It says you don't have the objects you need. Do you want them? And we say yes. Every time you first try to create a diagram, and we have tables we've already created. So I'm just going to select those two. I did Shift. And when I do that, and then I'm going to close this, it shows the tables. And notice it shows the relationship between them. All right, so this is a diagram. It's basically like an ERD diagram. The reason I didn't have you do your diagram here is though is everything we do in this diagram is reflected in the database. Right? I think when you're diagramming it, testing it, you shouldn't be building the database at the same moment. Does that make sense? It should be something that you do before you do that. But once you've got this, if you've got your diagram, your Visio diagram or whatever you use, you can come in here and translate it. So let's do, we've got, I'm going to make one more table. But this one I'm going to make in here. And I just right click in the middle of the white space. And if there's no tables, if you're just starting out, you can do this too. Just right click in the middle of the white space and say new table. I'm going to call this test results since I've got all these tests. And I'm going to do OK. And I'm going to do like test result. This looks just like the other dialog, right, that we did when we did new table. So I'm going to say test result ID. I'm going to make it an integer. And you don't have to go look, you can just type. I will right click on it and set it as the primary key. I don't know what I'm putting in here for fields. Yeah, let's do a result grade. Although our result.
No, because the ID would be that particular test.
Yeah, so so I'm thinking. I don't know. I'm making a database without thinking it through, which you should never do. I'll just do a test result grade. For a grade, I would probably do like decimal, and I don't think I need 18 and 10. So it's basically like 3 and 2, right? Well, it depends on what you're thinking of as grades. Are we thinking 4-point scale or 100 scale?
Oh, you could do like that would cover both. And make it just cover both.
All right. Well, so if we cover 100, so we need the total digits right now is 3. So we would need a digits of 5.
Yeah.
Okay. And I guess we could allow it. I don't know if we should allow it to be null. I don't know. And then let's just do test instance. I just called it test instances before. That's not good. I'll make it an int. All right, so to make this a foreign key here, I'm going to show you another way to make this. So we have test instances here, and we have test instances here. They're both int. They have to be the same data type. I'm going to grab the key, and I'm going to drag over to here. So basically, I'm going to escape that. Grab the key, drag over to test instances. I'm going to let go, and it says primary key table, foreign key table. You want to make sure that those are the right tables and that these are the right fields. I'm going to do OK. There's all sorts of options you can set, but for the most part, I'm going to suggest ignoring them and doing OK. And now we have the test instances related to test results. And if you want to change the table view, you can go to just column names so that it looks like the other ones. The asterisk here means it's not saved. So test instances was saved, but it has a relationship in it now. So if I save this diagram, and I'm just going to call it diagram 0, and it tells me what tables are affected, and I say yes. Now if I go over here and refresh on tables, I just want to refresh. There we go. I have 3 tables. I have the instances, the result, and I have the test results, and it has a foreign key for test instances. So you could basically just go through here, right-click, add new table for all the tables in your diagram, give it a name, for your diagram. I'm going to we don't have a linking table, but I want to show you if you want to do those double composite keys, I'll do that. So this isn't actually linked to anything, it just went up there. I'm going to do test table ID as an int. And I don't know. Where do I want to do this? And I'll do test instance. This table does not make any sense, by the way. I just want to show you how to do. Okay, so if I wanted them to both be primary keys, say this was a real linking table, I could just select them both. And the way I selected them both, I click into there, I hold the shift key down and I click there. And then if I right click and set primary key, it'll make a composite key. So you click on here, and then you hold the shift key down and click there. Right click, and you can make it I could remove the primary key. So click, shift, click, right click, primary key. And then again, you can drag. This doesn't make any sense and won't work probably, but if I do, so I have test ID, but I could, even if they're not the same name, as long as they're same type and relate. See, so it's there now. And I could go from here to make that as a foreign key also. So my table doesn't make any sense. That's a spider web of connections, but I'm just saying you could make, this is probably where I would do your whole database. I just deleted that table because it makes no sense. And it bothers me that it makes no sense. All right. I think that's pretty good in this. The other thing that I will say, so I'm saving it again. I'll show you real quickly how you can enter data. So let's do the test table first. If you right click on test table, you can do edit top 200 rows. Notice this is gray. That's because it's an auto number. I'm just going to say first test, and then I'm going to click down here and say second test, And if I click down here, see how it's auto numbering for me? And then if I go to test instances and right click, edit top 200 rows, this has an auto number, test location here, test date. What is today? 1/23, 2018. Test ID, it has to match one of the ones there. Elsewhere. So notice I didn't type it in that way the first time. In fact, I'm not going to now. And then I'll just do 2. Now what the red exclamation points mean is that row isn't saved. As soon as I click to the outside of it, it's saved. It saves row by row. As soon as you leave the row, it's written and saved. They do that so that if it all crashes, you haven't lost your data, right? You've only, at the worst, lost one row, the last row you were working on. Now, it's possible, like if I put another one in here, I don't know. And I think I made the date required. So let's do for tomorrow. And if I put 3 in here, it's not going to let me continue. Because 3 doesn't exist as a test, right? If we go back to our test table, we've only got 2 tests. So we can't enter a test 3 because it doesn't exist. That's what a foreign key forces. Foreign key, you can't enter it as a foreign key if it doesn't exist in the primary key table. It's to protect you from meaningless data. To get out of here, I have to press escape and kill the row. Or I could go back and add a third one and come back. All right, one last way to enter data. So I'm going to enter one more row in test. I guess I'll do it into test table. You can do like insert into test table. I just drug these over. Now the test ID is auto number, so I don't need that. And I'm going to do a comma. We'll enter test 4. And I'll just run that. So it says 2 rows affected. And if I do, this is how you could look at something. Select star from test table. And I don't know if you can see that because I didn't make my size down there bigger, but it has all the stuff I've added. Again, this can be one of your more efficient ways to enter data, but it's up to you if you want to write code or not. I'm not going to make it. You can do the right click and do the edit top 200 rows. So I think I showed you most of what you need to go ahead. I don't expect you to remember it all. Does that make sense? So this should all be recorded. I'll post this code up there. I'll post a picture of the diagram. Did I close the diagram? If I did, I can open it. Just double click it. There it is. Again, I would suggest building it in the diagram. I just think it's easier. You can just map your Visio directly to that. So, do you guys have questions? As I said, I don't expect this all to sink in. When you get your hands on it, it'll.
Say you wanted to use the query, could you then see how it looked in the diagram after?
Oh, certainly. So, if I go back, we did. Let's see. I'm looking for the sequel. When we did this, right, it showed up in the ready for the diagram.
Mhm.
Let me add just one more table. I won't relate it to anything. I'll just add it. So I'll do create table. Other tests. And I'm not going to put much in this. So parentheses. Other tests. Int identity 11 primary key. And I'm just going to put other test date. Date time. Here's something I'm going to say the default value. Get date is a built-in function that returns the current date time. So I'm going to build that. So the table was completed successfully. Now in the diagram, it's not there, but I can right-click, add table. Ooh, maybe not. Should just show add table. I don't know why it's saying out of bounds. Worst case scenario, you make a new diagram. Oh, now it's outside of bounds. I wonder why it's doing that. Generally, you just add table and it works. I don't know why it's doing. I don't know why it's doing that. I've never had it not where you just add table and it's there and you just add it. Yeah. Strange, but anyway. So I think what I'm going to do now is just meet with each of the groups as quick. I don't think the meetings will take more than 5 or 6 minutes. And then what we'll do is you guys can make any adjustments and turn in the adjusted diagram, and then you can start building if you want. Or I will probably give you an open lab to start building the database on Thursday, right? I never remember what day it is. So. Yeah. Yeah, probably. Let me, what I'm going to do is close this. I'm not going to save my SQL. Actually, I do need to save it. Let me don't close this. Cancel. I just want to do Control Alt. What I want to do is stop the video. So let's get out of this, this.